Welcome to Backyard Cigars, and on this given day, I have the privilege of presenting to you none other than the famous Leo. Now, Leo is a sales manager at the purveyor of geeky spirits. Is that correct?
PM Spirits. But
PM
we're
Spirits.
purveyors of geeky spirits.
And so I always rely on him for information on anything that is a spirit, and he always comes through, never fails. Walking encyclopedia. He's humble about it, but I know he is. And he's also a cigar lover, so the two worlds meet. And today we're going to do a video that is more about pairing your cigars with the right spirits. Now, as a cigar lover, when you think of pairing a cigar, in this question, we have a cigar from Dumbarton and Trust from Steve Saka, which is full-bodied, full strength. What do you think about, like, when you think about like pairing a cigar with a certain type of drink?
I don't know. I guess I tend to think opposites attract, right? So if I got something super big, maybe I want to pair it with something a little softer.
Okay.
Right? I don't want to clash.
Yes.
You don't want to do spice and spice, right? You don't want to do big and big. I mean, it could work in many occasions, but I tend to think opposites attract.
That's one of the reasons why I found it interesting that you have such a deep knowledge of mezcal and tequila, and most people think of pairing their cigars with bourbon or cognac or armagnac, but there's this idea that it just has to be that, but it doesn't, right? It could be a number of things, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, there's no rules to the game. I'm sure there's things that have been tried and work, so people continue to do so from others' experiences. But yeah, man, whatever's favorable to the individual.
I agree with that. Now, today, as I mentioned, we're smoking the Dumbarton and Trust by Steve Saka, and he is very well known for putting out incredible cigars, albeit complicated sometimes in their description. So, if I'm correct, this is an Ecuadorian Habano Rosado wrapper from La Meca, one of his farms in Ecuador. The binder, I forget where the binder's from. I think it's Mexican. Tiempo Negro, something like that. It's from an area in Mexico.
Okay.
So the binder's Mexican. And then in the filler, you've got 3 different regions from Esteli and Pennsylvania Broadleaf as well. So American tobacco is in this cigar as well. And now this cigar is a Toro size, so I believe it's a 6x52. And we're gonna light this up
Let's do it.
and drink some stuff and share some notes with you as to what it's like.
I don't know what all that means, but I'm involved.
We're gonna do the Wilderness Trail, which is bottled in bond at 100 proof.
That's the
This is
bourbon?
Yeah, we're gonna do the bourbon Wilderness Trail, and we're gonna get some ideas from Leo.
Well, so, I mean, this is a wheated bourbon. So I mean, bourbon, corn heavy, obviously, but there's a substantial amount of wheat in the mash bill, and I mean, these are somewhat newish players for folks who aren't familiar. And
Now,
yeah.
how old is this bourbon?
4 years and change. I'm sure it's
4
like
years.
4 years.
It's got to
plus
be
some
at
months.
least 4 because of the bottled in bond situation.
Correct.
And
Correct. But right now, everything that Wilderness Trail is releasing is a minimum of 4 years. They own their own distillery. They're working with local grains, and I think a standout.
They've been getting a lot of buzz lately.
Yeah, but I think a standout, I guess, note is a sweet mash versus a sour mash.
Okay, so I really have to ask you about that. I know what a sour mash is, and it doesn't translate actually to a mash being sour. But what's the deal with the sweet mash?
So the gentleman behind Wilderness Trail, these are two doctor slash PhD um, gentlemen who have another company first and foremost called Firm Solutions, and they spent a lot of time, just studying the DNA and the bacterias and in yeast and in fermentation, hence Firm Solutions, and they're contracted to over 600 distilleries throughout the U.S. where when someone's having issues with their fermentation, their brewing, they call these dudes over to come and they'll kind of clean it up and let them
So
know
they're
what the
like
problems
yeast
are.
doctors.
They're like yeast doctors, for sure.
Yeast scientists.
And I think in acquiring all this knowledge, information, and being bourbon fans themselves, they have this idea that sour mash, while is the more common and probably popular.
So explain the sour mash to the viewers as the traditional mash that's used in bourbon, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's more like think, I don't know, like sourdough bread, right? And having like a mother, or kind of reusing to kind of boost your fermentations. So when they're doing a fermentation, after that's done, they're not necessarily cleaning the tanks out. When you're doing a sour mash, you're just kind of going in and continuing. So that does impart some flavors, but they've seen a lot of negatives to that. So doing a sweet mash, again, it doesn't necessarily impart to immediate flavor, like sweet and sour. But what it's doing here is cleaning out and being consistent with the fermentation. So having less fuck ups.
Okay. So this is aimed at improving the whole mash process.
It's all subjective. This is their viewpoint. This is how they feel.
So, sort of scientific, would you say?
Definitely, 100%.
Well, science in a bottle. That was the main question that I had about Wilderness Trail. And another thing is, wheated bourbons aren't as common on the market as your typical either high rye or high corn bourbons, where they're using different grains, right?
I'm not 100%. I'm not 100%. Like I don't follow what everyone else is doing. I don't know the degree, but I know the wheated for Wilderness Trail is one of the more popular. They do make rye heavy.
Okay.
They do make a rye. There are a few special bottlings that are a little older. As it is a fairly young distillery. I mean, while everything is their juice, there will be increased, releases and I don't want to say experimentation, but there will be different things that we will see down the line.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I mention that is because I kind of remember wheated bourbon. For those of you who may or may not know, Maker's Mark is a wheated bourbon. Larceny is a wheated bourbon, which is a lower end but very good quality bourbon. But I remember wheated bourbon being something that kind of took off with Pappy, because Pappy's a wheated bourbon. And when people found out that Pappy was a wheated bourbon, and they started kind of trying to look for the equivalent, so to speak, even though you really couldn't find it, they did the whole Weller experiment, where if you mix this Weller bourbon, because Weller was a wheated bourbon, with a little bit of this bourbon, because it came from sort of the same mash bill, that you could get something that tasted like Pappy, which was BS, but people did it anyway. And they started snatching up all the bottles of Weller, and then you couldn't find Weller on the shelves. Forget about finding Weller 12, you can't even find Weller Special Reserve, which used to be $20 a bottle. So, without further ado, let's give this a nose and cheers. Smells great. What are you smelling with? Because I know that when we do this, your take on it is always on another level, and I have to get your opinion.
Yeah, I think I joke a lot about whiskey and say you can pretty much grab any whiskey and say vanilla, toast, and caramel, and you're probably right. So I'm not going to point to those descriptors, but that's common. I feel this is on the nose a little bready, very soft. I don't get as much of that big toast element. I do sense a little bit more of a fruitier,
I'm getting that
of
fruit.
a fruity. Not that it's sweet, but it's a little brighter.
It's bold. It's bold.
Well, we are looking at what I mean. This is
It's 100 proof.
It's the 100 proof. That's right.
So
And it's and these releases are single barrels, so obviously limited to how many quantity.
So one thing I'm getting from it is that I am getting some of that youth, the youthfulness that, what some people might say, greenery or green. I'm not saying it's green.
Okay.
It's not green, but I am feeling like I get some of that youth, and not in a negative way. And then actually, it's in a positive way, because the way you mentioned how that big fruit, the boldness, it translates into the flavor. Like I'm getting a little bit of that flavor where it's bold and fruity, some youth, and I think I'm probably repeating something that a lot of people say, but I'd love to see what it would be like at 8 years old. Love to see what it would be like at even 6 years old. But nonetheless, at 100 proof, it's pretty smooth. I didn't add any water. I didn't add any water to yours. And normally with 100 proof, I'm adding a little bit of water to dilute it just a little bit.
And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, add water to your liking. Drink at full proof if you're okay with that. I don't think there's a right and wrong there. I think things that are 4 or 5 years old, which I think a lot of these newer distilleries finally have gotten to.
Yeah.
Is where you just have a nice flavor profile that you can kind of drink regularly. I don't think it's always about buying and holding on to things and waiting for the sky to fall for you to be like, oh, it's time for me to drink these fucking bottles.
Yes. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I always like to say I'm not a collector. That I buy to
I don't
drink.
collect shit.
Right? I say that, and I like to say that with everything. I buy cigars to smoke them, not to collect them, and I buy spirits to drink them. But I do hold on to a lot of bottles for rainy days, special occasions, things like that. And I remember one time I sent you a picture of a rare rum, the raw cask.
Yep.
It's like a $200 bottle, and I had it for some time, and you just texted me back like, crack that shit and drink, open it, just something to that effect. And that kind of like prompted me to say to myself, yeah, why am I holding on to this bottle for so long? Why am I not opening it and enjoying it? Because I tried it for the first time when I took the course. I took a course on cognac, mezcal, tequila at Leo's offices, and that was one of the rums, and I love rum, but I had never had a rum quite like that. It was a Jamaican rum, heavy esters, right? It was it had the scrapings. Explain that. It had the scrapings.
Yeah, all right. So something we don't have in front of us is Blackadder, who's an independent bottler of different scotches, rums, and what they do in their bottling process is they go into the barrel and they take all the barrel scrapings, right? They're pulling what's left behind from most folks who are just pouring everything out and putting the barrels down. So they want to pick up all the kind of fatty oils and whatever's left behind. And along with that comes these kind of barrel scrapings and or some chars, pieces of wood, and they'll they do a special bottling process where they're evenly distributing that through the release of that cask. So you'll pick up a bottle, and yeah, I mean it's fun to see and shake up the bottle and see stuff in there. Sometimes people might think, oh, I don't want that. They do a simple filtration process to remove big pieces or sharp pieces, so you don't fucking die or hurt yourself drinking. Yeah. But that's flavor. The idea is to drink as if you were drinking directly from the cask, and they call that raw cask.
Raw cask. Now, in relation to that, to some degree, when we talk about bourbons, maybe not specifically this one, when it comes to the char level of how the distillery chooses a char level for their barrels, right? You got char 1, 2, 3, and then you got 4, which is the alligator char, which is kind of like those scrapings, right?
I mean,
Is that
looking
also?
for bolder flavors. I mean, that's just preference to the distiller, or the cellar master, or whoever's there, and maybe they're doing outside of single barrel releases. Maybe they're doing different char levels and kind of finding that happy balance by tasting and blending and playing that game.
So that, my friends, is what happened when I decided to just start drinking the bottles that I had. Some I still have for special occasions. You know, it's okay, but life is about enjoyment, right?
Yeah,
And
I mean,
enjoying
you also don't need to fucking open a bottle and kill it in one sitting, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like there's something special about opening a new bottle, having a few glasses, putting the cap back on, going back to it a couple weeks later, tasting it again, and continuing to do so. And I think when you have a lot of air in your bottle over a period of time, the spirit develops and it changes. And it, maybe at a very slow rate, maybe there is some type of oxidation.
I've noticed that in some bottles, like
And again, preference
Like
to an individual.
Some
There
palates.
might be your sweet spot.
Yeah.
You're smoking a stick, right? We were talking before about the three,
first, second, and final thirds. Yeah.
and like I tend to really like cigars when they're in that kind of the end of that second part, end of the middle.
Yeah.
Part of it is just the feel. I like when something feels a little kind of softer.
Okay.
But I, like you said, those flavors get bolder, and
Yeah.
for me, I don't know.
Spice.
Maybe I just like really bold flavors, but I mean, I think that's just delicious, and I kind of think sometimes they're softer.
So that
I think I'm sorry to cut you,
No.
but I think the front end for me is probably the hardest part of the cigar.
I think it is for a lot of folks because the cigar is still kind of developing, and a lot of cigars, depending on their complexity or just how they were rolled, the vitola
Well,
size.
you're smoking, so you kind
Yeah.
of get used to smoking a little bit, and
You
then
gotta
your,
develop.
your palate itself softens up, right? Like the
Yeah.
same in booze, where that first drink of alcohol for the day, like that's probably gonna it's a palate prep. It's gonna give you
Yeah.
a little bit of heat. You can be like, oh wow.
Shock the palate a little.
So you kind of gotta get past that, and then your second, third rounds, it's like, oh, now this is kind of hitting a little easier.
I've noticed that specifically with this bottle. When I first had my first drink from it, I wasn't very impressed, and I thought to myself, well, I just opened it, right? Give it time, Jose. Have another drink. Let it air out a little bit in the glass, and allow your palate to sort of get a hold of these flavors. It's 100 proof. You just had it with no water. Give it some time, and I did. And the second drink was just marvelous, and I thought it was impressive, and I thought that what they're doing with their product is just incredible.
And I'm just going back to nosing that, and now I'm getting more of this kind of coffee and cream
Yeah,
element.
it does have a creamy finish to it. It's got long legs, but it's got a slightly creamy finish to it.
How you feeling the pairing with the cigar?
I think it pairs perfectly because, so I asked you a long time ago if you've ever had Mexican tobacco, and you said you didn't know if you had. Well, you're having it today in the binder. And though the binder doesn't make as much of an impact on the overall flavor profile of the cigar, it does influence certain things. Now, Mexican tobacco can be slightly cocoa notes. It can offer some sweetness, and then we've got the variations of the Nicaraguan tobacco with the Pennsylvania tobacco in here, and this pretty much makes this a powerhouse cigar in my book. So it's the perfect type of cigar to pair with, I think, 100 proof bourbon.
So yeah, it's the level of the aficionado.
I agree with you 100%. And in a way, it's like that with cigars too. You can take a cigar and you can drape it in a Nicaraguan wrapper that might be strong, right? Considered strong. You can put some Nicaraguan Ligero in it, and you can put something else in it. But
What's a ligero?
Ligero is the type of leaf.
Okay.
It's an upper priming, which has more of that nicotine strength. So when you smoke an LFD double Ligero, you've got an extra amount of that Ligero leaf in it, so more of that nicotine strength. But if you notice with that LFD in particular, when you're smoking it, you don't feel the strength up front just like that. It's sort of an accumulation after smoking it after some time because of the way it's blended, the way it's crafted. It doesn't overwhelm you right away. It takes some smoking on it, and it isn't overly bitter or harsh, but it has double Ligero in it, and it's strong. It's one of the strongest cigars that I've ever smoked, at least. But smoking it, I didn't think I was smoking the strongest cigar ever. I thought it was smooth.
You know, you're telling me this is a big cigar, and like I think for me this is kind of mild. I mean, there's not a lot of spice to it, but there is some, and it's enough. It's mouth filling, and it's very balanced.
It is very balanced.
And I use the word balance lightly. I sometimes feel something's too balanced doesn't really have a lot of flavors leaning into one direction where I prefer to have a big note here and there. But this is all around very pleasing.
It's well balanced, and that's a testament to the guy behind it, Steve Saka.
Steve Saka,
who his famous cigar Muestra de Saka. He's done legendary cigars where he's used all of these kind of exotic tobaccos, and they were not really exotic, but he makes them sound exotic, and they can be. So this same blend in a Corona Vitola, which is a slimmer Vitola size, right? Okay. It's like let's say it's a 46 ring gauge. This is a 52. Is so much more overwhelming and strong on the palate than this Vitola size. So sometimes the way that you take the blend and in the size of the cigar will also determine on how your palate perceives that strength. So I like to do I think of like the Muhammad Ali thing. Muhammad Ali couldn't knock you out with one punch, but he could hit you 100 times so much more throughout the fight. The accumulation of those blows would make you fall. So the strength in this cigar, you're gonna feel it probably when you get halfway, and it starts to pick up, and some of these flavors will come out. And by then, you're invested, you're enjoying it, you started off nice, smooth, easy. But I think that it remains with a good balance throughout. And I think that that's, like you said, like a master distiller, a master blender does the same thing. So I do feel you on this. This is really good. Now, we are going to take an intermission, and we will be right back.